The next sample is going to be a flapped welt pocket. So as you can see here, this is my flap, and when I lift it up, I have a welt. And you can see inside is my pocket bag. In this case, the flap is one piece that's just a rectangle that's actually cut on the fold. You can see here, this is where I've basted where the based stitching is. You can see that is where I've basted down my interfacing to hold, my horsehair interfacing to hold in place, and then I pressed it flat. And then your welt is on the inside here. So this is the pocket I'm going to be showing you. I'm also going to be showing you a new way to do pockets where the pocket bag lining is sewn at the same time. This does make it a little trickier, but it is a really, really nice finish when it's done. So if you're willing to take your time, it's a beautiful pocket. So let's go ahead and learn how to make the welt pocket. So these are the elements that you will need to get set up for your pocket. First, of course, you have your jacket body. This is, I'm using a 10 by 10 inch square of scrap fabric. This is a very fine wool. So that will be the pretending that that's my jacket body. I also, right away, first thing, did my iron-on interfacing. I put a strip that is 1 inch longer than what my pocket is going to be. So in this case, I'm making a 5.5 inch pocket. So my horsehair is 6.5 inches long by about an 1.5 inches wide. I've marked where my pocket's going to be. I've basted, as you can see, I've basted my line where my pocket is so that when I turn it over on the right side, it may be hard to see in this light, but you can see my red thread there. That's where my pocket is going to be placed. This is the right side of my jacket. This is the wrong side. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate for you is a two-piece flap pocket where the flap is shaped. In this case, this is kind of a traditional V shape. I just want to show you because the other one is really just nothing more than a rectangle cut on the fold at the measurements that you need. Here I've determined some shape, and you can play with shapes all along here, but I want to cut two of them. Okay, so that's your flap. I'm going to cut my welt. Again, I'm going to cut my welt 1 inch longer than my opening. So my opening is 5.5 inches, so my welt is 6. I press it in half, and the depth is about 1 inch. So this is about 2 inches by 6 inches, this piece of scrap fabric. And then I want to also cut a piece of horsehair. Now my horsehair happens to be gray. Yours is probably a light tan. That's what it typically comes in. This, for now, I'm going to cut the same size as my pocket because I'm going to baste it on and then score it back. Okay, so these are the pieces that you need for your flap and welt pocket. For my pocket bag, and this will be cut out of your cotton, I have 2 squares. In this case, I'm using muslin for my sample. I always add an extra few inches to my pocket bag. Because, again, you can always trim it back if it's too much. So in this case, these pieces are 7.5 inches wide for a 5.5 inch pocket. And then for length, I did 6 inches on the top pocket, or it's actually the under pocket, the pocket that faces the body. And then the back one is 3/4 of an inch longer. So what I'm going to do with these which is different than what we did the last time, is I'm going to take them and I'm going to fold them in half. Again, if you create a pattern piece, you won't have to worry about this. This is just for your sample. What I'm going to do is at the same time, to make sure that the corners are all exactly the same, I'm going to go ahead and round these off. And again, you can use your ruler if you're feeling less confident about it. So now I have an upper and a lower pocket that are nice and round. And now I'm ready to start sewing. So I'm going to start by constructing the flap. So what I've done is I've taken, I switched over to pink thread, hoping you could see a little better. Zoom in here a little bit. And I've basted, this is my horsehair, I've basted my horsehair to my pocket flap. And I'm basting on the inside. I'm not using it for anything other than to hold my horsehair really flat when I go to sew this together. So that's just really a basting guide. So what I'm going to do now is to take my pockets and put right sides together. And I've drafted this at 1/2 inch, so I'm going to stitch 1/2 inch down one side, across the bottom, up the bottom, and up to the top. I'm going to leave this open. That's where I'm going to turn it. So I've stitched 1/2 inch all the way around. And now what I'm going to, first thing I'm going to do, so here's my fashion fabric side, and here is my side with my horsehair facing, interfacing. I'm going to take it and I'm going to use my small scissors. These are where, if you don't have a pair of small embroidery scissors that are surgically sharp, now's the time to invest in them because they're wonderful. So I'm going to score all my seam allowance back almost right to the stitching. Once I've scored back my interfacing, then I'm going to come and trim off my seam allowance. Now in industry, a lot of these seam allowances are set so you don't trim, but we're doing handwork here. So again, I'm going to trim back my seam allowance, not quite as far back as my interfacing. I'm going to take off that point. I'm going to take off this point, the corner, so I can turn the corner. I'm going to take back some seam allowance here, take off this corner, and then take off my seam allowance here. And what I like to do sometimes is to cut not too closely, but just give a little snip there at the point, so that when you go to turn it inside out, it'll fold on top of each other, if that makes any sense. And then I'm going to take my pocket and turn it inside out. This is my pocket flap. Now, you know, in sewing, there's lots of gadgets out there to make things easier, particularly when you're hand custom making, bespoking a garment. Some of these tools are great. This is one of my favorite tools in my studio. It's my point turner, so it's plastic. Try not to use the point of your scissors if you can help it, but this will actually get in, and it's at an angle, and will push, gently push my fabric into the corner, the point of my pocket. So I'm starting to see a nice shape now. This corner's tucked in a little tighter. but I'm very gently, I'm placing the point inside the seam allowance and pushing it out. Okay. Now I'm ready for a good press. So I've pressed really well my welt pocket flap and my welt. And then what I'm going to do is machine-based stitch at about a 1/2 inch, or depending on what size you want your flap to be and your welt to be. Once you've machine-based them, make sure they're really nice and straight. Then you're going to trim back that seam allowance to a 1/4 inch. Again, a lot of the things we'll be doing in this course are steps that are skipped in the industry because they're into mass manufacturing, getting it done, not the fine craftsmanship of tailoring. Same thing on my flap. I'm going to cut it back to about a 1/4 inch. So in my case, I'm cutting it in half. And when these line up on our next step, you'll see that creates the distance. So if I abut them, that's the difference where you get your hand in, right there, that space. Now I'm going to take my jacket body, where my pocket is marked, and I'm going to put my flap on first. I'm going to line up my top stitching line with my pocket placement line exactly. I'm going to put a pin in it just to hold it in place while I baste it. And then I'm going to take my welt and abut my welt to the edge of that pocket. Again, I'm going to try and get it centered. It's going to be longer than your flap, your welt. That's okay, because that's going to get turned into the inside to tack down. So with the welt abutted to the pocket flap, you can stick a pin in there too. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and hand baste those into place. So I've basted my flap and my welt on. I've used pink thread, if you can see here. Let me zoom in so you can really see. And I marked exactly where the end of that pocket is, all the way over. I've hand basted it this time over to the end. And then the welt, the same thing. I'm not going to the end of the welt. I'm starting right across from that pocket. And again, those 2 points where the needle goes in are the most important thing to pay attention to. And then I'm straight across, and I'm ending again at right across from that end of the pocket. I can flip it over to the other side to see how I'm doing. This one looks a little over, so I'm going to just double check that. This side looks okay. So the next step is to now take my pocket bags and do the same thing. So I'm going to take my larger bag and put it on the top. I'm going to line it up with the edge of this edge of my pocket and center it over the flap itself. Then I'm going to take my smaller bag and do the same thing. And take my pins out now. Forgot to take this pin out. Make sure they don't get in the way. And again, too, I forgot to here to make sure that you put the right side facing the right side of the jacket. If you have a right and wrong side to your pocket flap and fits 2 colors. So the bigger bag is going up here, centered. The smaller bag is going here and centered. And now I'm going to baste through. I'm going to baste these down into place. So not only so that they don't shift, but also so that I can see exactly where to stitch. So I've basted my two pocket bags, my lower pocket and my upper pocket bag, onto my jacket sample. So it's now caught the welt on the bottom and the flap on the top. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I've done to be exact. So you want to make sure I took my ruler and I squared off from this point. I attached the top one first. Then I lined up the bottom one, squared it off. So I make sure that these 2 points are exactly across from each other. Again, that's the key. And then I'm going to stitch down, and I did the same thing on this side. So I know that this point and this point have to be directly across from each other. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and stitch these lines across, one here and one there. And it's not a basting stitch, it's your regular stitch. And at this point, I can flip it over and see exactly what's going on. So I can see what size my opening is going to be, and I can see here where I pretty much lined up exactly with where my placement of my pocket wants to be. So in this case, the placement is the upper seam where the flap will come out of. Okay, I've got my stitching done. If I flip it over, I can see exactly how I did. So again, I'm wanting to make sure that these are right across from each other. They look pretty close, just a split hair off there. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is connect them. That one's off. And I'm going to measure in 3/8 of an inch and roll myself a dot right in the middle. And the same thing on this side, right about the middle. I'm going to roll myself a dot. Draw a line to connect. Now this time, and then I'm going to go in and cut. You take these, make sure that your pockets are out of the way. Give yourself a little snip. Time to sharpen the scissors. And now I'm going to cut. This time I'm really only cutting through 2 layers. So it's a little bit easier than the last one we did. To here. And I'm going to cut over. From there I'm going to miter. It's called mitering. Miter it into the corner. Right there with my little scissor. This side will be easier because it's the welt. Don't cut through. Make sure everything is flat on the other side before you start cutting again, so that you're not cutting into your lining by accident. It's probably one of the downsides of this way of doing it. And I think I'm going to switch over to my, give it a try on this side. Yeah, I think I need my other scissors for this. Okay, flip it over to the right side. Now I'm going to take everything and turn it to the inside. Pull the pockets through. Pull my welts through. Okay, so I can straighten this out for you enough to see. Okay, there's my pocket and my welt, and then on this side, hopefully I've caught everything. I'm pulling my pocket out. The last few steps are closing up the pocket. So you're going to take that top pocket, fold it over your bottom pocket, line them up. If they don't line up, it's fine. You can straighten them out. Fold them together, and then you're going to flip the jacket to the right side. You're going to take and pull open vertically. You're going to start to sew, and when you sew, you're going to catch the triangle. You're going to come down, sew along the pocket bag up to the other side, and again, I'll zoom in a little for you here to make sure you catch the triangle on this side. So again, that's the beauty of the iron-on interfacing, is that your triangle stays intact while you're stitching, and that's going to close up the side of that welt. Okay, so all the way around, and again, if you find that your pocket is not lined up exactly, it's okay. Sew it as straight as you can, and then you can just trim it back. Okay? Then what you'll do, once your pocket is sewn around these sides, is you'll take and cross stitch, as you see I've done here. Take your cross stitch and just tack your seam allowance down so that it doesn't pop up and make a mess for you against the lining. What you want to do here is to pick up your horsehair, so you're actually sewing the top edge of this pocket right to your horsehair. You don't want to go, obviously, to the other side of the jacket. You want that to be nice and clean. But that cross stitch acts, this is the one stitch that we'll use on all the hemming and anything to tack down. This cross stitch you see almost all the time in tailoring. And there you go. There's your pocket. You have a nice flap. Of course, really good press really helps. And again, wool is very forgiving, so if there are little tiny things that are off, it'll get absorbed. Look inside. Here's your pocket bag. Nice and clean. Your welts. Welt is there to finish the edge, and that's your flap pocket with a welt.